Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are clearing the decks today because the signal-to-noise ratio coming out of the Middle East just went completely off the charts.
It really has.
We need to talk about Washington, but not the usual gridlock. We're looking at a specific meeting this Wednesday that feels less like a diplomatic summit and, I don't know, more like an emergency room triage.
That's a great way to put it. The timeline of events over just the last 48 hours has been incredibly compressed.
So, okay, let's start with the headline that really grabbed my attention. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has suddenly, and I mean in a way that just rips up protocol, moved up a planned trip to Washington. He's meeting with President Trump this Wednesday.
And we need to be crystal clear about what moving up means here. This is not just, checking for better flight availability.
Right.
This is a deliberate, strategic intervention in ongoing U.S.-Iran negotiations.
Exactly. So our mission today is to really decode what is happening behind those closed doors.
Yeah.
We're not just looking at a photo op. We are looking at a collision of diplomatic strategies, involving the U.S., Israel, Iran, and a very interesting coalition of Arab mediators who, well, it seems they just got handed a significant defeat.
A major defeat. And to do this, we're pulling from a stack of sources that includes the revised meeting schedules, some specific diplomatic cables about proposals from Egypt, Turkey, and Qatar, and some very, very sharp statements coming directly from Netanyahu's office.
Let's unpack the timing first, because in politics, the calendar is often the real message. Netanyahu was originally booked for the AI PAC conference, right?
Correct. That was scheduled for later in the month, February 18th to the 22nd.
Okay, so let's just pause on that for a second.
Yeah.
AI PAC's a massive event. It's a home turf crowd for any Israeli prime minister. You go, you get standing ovations, you shore up political support.
Absolutely.
You don't cancel or shift that kind of appearance lightly. You just don't snub a constituency like that unless, the house is on fire.
Precisely. A standard visit would have been structured, full of pomp, very predictable. Scrapping that to fly in now, 2 weeks early, it just signals extreme urgency. The official reason given was diplomatic activity, which is the polite way of saying something is happening that we need to stop or at least shape immediately.
Diplomatic activity. It's such a vague phrase, but in this context, it just screams that the U.S.-Iran channel is moving much faster than Israel expected.
Or moving in a direction that Jerusalem finds completely unacceptable. That's the assessment. Netanyahu likely receives intelligence that a deal, or at the very least a framework, was crystallizing.
And if he waits?
If he waits until the 18th, the ink might already be dry. He needs to be physically in the room with Trump before the cement sets.
And speaking of who is in the room, I was looking at the attendee list for these meetings, and, well, one name just stopped me in my tracks.
Oh,
It wasn't
yeah.
a diplomat. It was U.S. Navy Admiral Brad Cooper.
The commander of Central Command, CSHN-COM.
Right. Now, help me out here. Usually, negotiation teams are, guys in suits with briefcases, maybe some State Department policy wonks. Why is the head of U.S. naval forces in the Middle East sitting at the table for a nuclear negotiation?
It changes the entire temperature of the room, doesn't it? When you bring the CNTCOM commander, you aren't just talking about sanctions relief or, enrichment percentages anymore. You're putting maps on the table.
It feels like a very, very specific kind of messaging.
Oh, it's coercive diplomacy 101. It signals that all this diplomatic activity is being backed by immediate, kinetic options. It tells the other side, and frankly the allies in the room, that if the talking fails, the planning for the alternative has already begun.
Wow.
Admiral Cooper isn't there to draft clauses. He is there to represent the or else.
That puts a serious chill on everything. It suggests military options aren't just, theoretical talking points. They're being integrated into the negotiation strategy in real time.
And we know the talks are real. The Omani foreign minister, and you have to remember, Oman is basically the Swiss banker of Middle East diplomacy. Very discreet, very reliable. He described the talks as very serious. He said the results are going to be evaluated by both capitals.
So this isn't just vaporware. There's a test. There's an actual proposal on the table. And that brings us to Netanyahu's play. He rushes to D.C. because he sees this train leaving the station. We have a statement from his office released on Saturday that outlines his position, and it really doesn't sound like he's coming to compromise.
Not at all. He is pushing for a tougher stance.
Tougher, which implies that whatever is currently on the table, he thinks it's full of holes.
Well, Netanyahu is insisting on what his office calls a comprehensive approach. And this is really where the philosophical clash happens. In standard diplomacy, when you have a complex problem, you try to compartment. You say, okay, let's fix the nuclear issue first, then we'll worry about the other stuff.
All right, you the elephant one bite at a time.
Netanyahu is saying, no, you have to eat the whole elephant or we don't eat at all. He is insisting that any agreement must include a limitation on ballistic missiles, and it must include a cessation of support for the Iranian axis.
And when we say Iranian axis, we're not just talking about rhetoric. We're talking about the operational network Hezbollah in Lebanon, the militias in Syria and Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen.
Exactly. It's the entire ecosystem of influence. Israel's argument is like you cannot separate the nuclear program from the regional violence. They see it as a single threat vector.
So from their point of view, a deal that freezes the nuclear program but leaves Iran flush with cash to send precision-guided missiles to Hezbollah
Doesn't make Israel safer. In fact, they would argue it makes them more vulnerable.
There was a moment during a meeting with Witkoff in Jerusalem where Netanyahu really laid this out. He said, quote, Iran has repeatedly demonstrated that it cannot be trusted to keep its commitments.
And that is the absolute core of the Israeli doctrine here, the trust deficit. Netanyahu is arguing that any deal based on, verifying a specific technical thing like uranium enrichment levels is flawed because the counterparty has bad intent.
So that's why he wants to expand it.
That's why he wants to expand the terms to include tangible physical things like missile stockpiles. You can't hide a ballistic missile program as easily as you can hide a centrifuge cascade.
But this is where the rubber meets the road, right? It takes two to make a deal. Netanyahu can demand the moon, but Iran gets a vote. And from what the forces are saying, Iran isn't just hesitant about discussing their missiles, they're stonewalling.
It is a hard red line. The sources are very explicit. Iran has refused to even discuss its ballistic missile program.
It's a flat no.
A complete non-starter. And look, you have to try to see this from Tehran's strategic view for a moment. Our sources note that Iran's ballistic missile program is among the largest in the Middle East.
Right, and they don't have a modern air force. They don't have a fleet of F-35s like Israel does.
Exactly. The missiles are their shield. They view that arsenal as their primary deterrent against invasion or attack. So when Israel says, give up the missiles, Iran hears disarm so we can attack you later.
So we have a situation where Israel views the missiles as an existential threat.
And Iran views them as an existential necessity.
A perfect deadlock. And then you layer on the nuclear issue itself. Iran briefed Reuters recently, and they are doubling down on the right to enrich uranium.
The right to enrich, they frame it as a sovereignty issue.
For energy, for technology.
Of course. But for the U.S. and Israel, enrichment is simply the pathway to a bomb. So you have these two diametrically opposed positions. Israel wants a comprehensive halt to everything, nukes, missiles, militias. Iran is saying, we have a right to enrich and our missiles are none of your business.
It feels impossible. But usually, this is where the mediators earn their paychecks.
Yeah.
And this is the part of the research I found most fascinating, because we actually have details on a specific proposal put forward by a very interesting group of countries, Egypt, Turkey, and Qatar.
This trio is really significant. Look at the makeup. You have Turkey, a NATO member, but one that keeps its own council. You have Egypt, a staunch U.S. ally with a peace treaty with Israel. And you have Qatar, which often acts as the interlocutor for groups the West won't talk to directly.
It's a dream team of mediation, in a way. They cover all the bases. If anyone could thread this needle, you'd think it would be this group.
And they tried. They put a specific 3-point plan on the table. And I think we should go through these points because they were so clearly designed to be the least bad options for everyone involved.
Okay, let's break it down. What was the first pillar?
Point 1, Iran suspends enrichment for 3 years.
3 years. So not a permanent ban. It's a pause button.
It's a cooling off period. It kicks the can down the road, sure, but it buys time for cooler heads to prevail. It avoids the humiliation of a permanent ban for Iran while addressing the immediate urgency for the West.
Okay, sounds plausible. What was point 2?
Point 2, Iran exports its highly enriched uranium.
So you ship the dangerous stuff out of the country so you can't use it for a weapon tomorrow.
Exactly. It drastically lowers the breakout time, the time it would take to build a bomb. It's a physical safety valve.
And the third point, this is the one that really caught my eye on the missiles.
Point 3, Iran commits to not initiating the use of ballistic missiles.
Not initiating. That is very, very specific lawyerly phrasing.
It's extremely careful diplomatic language. It doesn't say destroy the missiles. It doesn't say stop building them. It just says promise not to fire the first shot. It was an attempt to address Israel's security concerns without forcing Iran to strip itself of its defenses.
That sounds remarkably reasonable compared to destroy everything. Simply asking for a promise not to start a war seems like the lowest possible bar.
It was designed to be the easy yes. It allowed Iran to keep its arsenal, but gave the region a security guarantee. It was this so-called Goldilocks proposal. And yet,
Tehran rejected it.
they didn't just reject it, they dismantled it. They refused to end enrichment. They refused to export the uranium. And they labeled the terms non-negotiable.
Wow. That's a heavy blow. I mean, if Egypt, Turkey, and Qatar neighbors, trading partners, nations with a vested interest in regional stability, if they can't get Iran to agree to even a temporary pause.
It says a lot about the mindset in Tehran right now. It suggests they are digging in. They likely view the 3-year pause as a trap away to weaken their leverage while sanctions remain or new threats emerge.
And the missile clause.
Well, think about it. If you promise not to strike first, you lose the ambiguity that makes deterrence work, right?
If your enemy knows for sure you won't fire first, they might feel emboldened to push you right up to the edge.
Exactly. Iran wasn't willing to give up that strategic uncertainty.
So the soft power option, the proposal from the neighbors, has completely hit a brick wall. And when soft power fails, hard power usually steps in to fill the vacuum.
Which brings us back to Admiral Cooper and the map.
We have to zoom out and look at the physical reality. While these diplomats are passing rejected papers back and forth, the sources mention a massive U.S. military deployment currently in the Persian Gulf region.
This isn't just a standard patrol.
No. Massive implies a buildup of assets designed for, well, high-intensity conflict. And it's happening alongside the rhetoric. The reports note that President Trump has been repeatedly threatening military action against Iran in recent weeks.
So let's connect the dots. You have the negotiations stalling. You have Iran rejecting the compromise from its own regional mediators. You have Netanyahu rushing to D.C. to demand a tougher stance because he says the current path is failing.
And you have a massive U.S. fleet sitting just off the coast.
It creates a pressure cooker environment. Netanyahu isn't going to Washington to argue about grammar in a treaty. He is going there to coordinate strategy for what happens when the diplomacy collapses.
And the presence of Admiral Cooper suggests that the U.S. is already preparing for exactly that scenario.
It certainly does. It signals that the window for talking is closing. Remember, the Omani foreign minister said the results would be evaluated by both capitals?
Yeah.
Well, if the evaluation is Iran rejected the proposal and Israel's evaluation is we need a tougher stance, those vectors are pointing directly toward confrontation.
It really reframes the whole meeting on Wednesday. It's less like a negotiation and more like, I don't know, war planning, or at least the final stage of coercion.
And remember, Israel's demand for a cessation of support for the Iranian access strikes at the very heart of Iran's regional power. Iran has spent decades building these proxy networks.
Right.
They view them as essential to their foreign policy. Asking them to stop is like asking the U.S. to dismantle NATO. It's a fundamental change in their entire doctrine.
So we have an immovable object meeting an unstoppable force. Iran won't budge on enrichment or missiles. Israel won't accept a deal that leaves those intact. And the U.S. is parking an armada nearby while trying to mediate.
That's the situation in a nutshell. And the failure of the Egypt-Turkey-Qatar proposal is the canary in the coal mine. It shows that the middle ground has completely evaporated.
It's interesting, you mentioned the trust deficit earlier. Netanyahu told Witkoff that Iran can't be trusted. But looking at the Iranian rejection of even the regional proposal, does that kind of validate his point, at least in the eyes of the White House?
From the perspective of the hawks in Washington and Jerusalem, absolutely. They would look at that rejection and say, see? We told you. They won't even agree to a 3-year pause proposed by their own neighbors. They are determined to get the bomb. It strengthens Netanyahu's hand in his meeting with Trump.
So he can point to that failure and say,
the soft approach didn't work. Now we do it my way.
And his way means expanding the scope to include the missiles and the militias, or no deal at all.
Right. But here is the massive risk. If you demand everything, if you say, give up the nukes, the missiles, and the proxies, and Iran has already said no to just the nukes, aren't you just guaranteeing that the talks fail?
That's the real question, isn't it? Is this a negotiating tactic to squeeze Iran until they finally crack? Or is it setting the stage for conflict because the demands are knowingly impossible for them to meet?
And that is what the analysts will be watching on Wednesday. When Netanyahu comes out of that meeting with Trump, you have to listen to the language. If they talk about joint resolve and all options, it means they are pivoting to pressure.
And if they talk about continued engagement?
Maybe there is still a sliver of hope. But with Admiral Cooper in the room, all options seems to be the phrase of the day.
The military context is not subtle at all.
Not in the slightest. The deployment is there for everyone to see.
It's a sobering reality. We often think of these deep dives as exploring history or complex systems. But today we are looking at history being written in real time, and it's a very, very dangerous chapter.
It is. This impacts global stability, not just the Middle East. Energy prices, shipping routes, regional alliances, everything is tied into this standoff.
So to recap before we wrap up, Netanyahu is in Washington now, days ahead of schedule, driven by this diplomatic activity that suggests a deal was moving too fast or too vaguely for Israel's liking.
Correct. And at the same time, Iran has just flatly rejected a compromise from Egypt, Turkey, and Qatar that would have paused enrichment and limited missile use. They called it non-negotiable.
And in response, Israel is doubling down, demanding the deal be broadened to include those very missiles and the entire Iranian axis of militias, citing a total lack of trust. And of course, looming over all of this is a massive U.S. military deployment and a Navy admiral at the negotiating table.
It's a collision of diplomatic strategies, and the collision point is this Wednesday.
Here's the thought I want to leave you with. We talked about the failure of the regional mediators, Egypt, Turkey, Qatar. These are countries that know the neighborhood better than anyone. So if they couldn't get Iran to agree to a temporary 3-year pause on enrichment, does Netanyahu's push for a tougher, more comprehensive deal actually make a solution more likely by applying maximum pressure? Or does raising the bar when the other side is already saying no just guarantee the collapse of diplomacy entirely?
That is the question that will determine what happens next.
Thanks for diving in with us. We'll be watching Wednesday very closely.
Stay informed.
See you next time.